The sun hung like a merciless eye above the Arizona desert, its heat waves dancing across the endless expanse of sand and rock. Clara Mitchell pressed her heels harder into her mare's flanks, urging the exhausted animal forward despite the foam gathering at its mouth. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage wrapped around her left arm, each jolt of movement sending fresh waves of pain through her body. She had been riding for 2 days straight, stopping only when the horse threatened to collapse beneath her. The wound on her arm, a deep gash from barbed wire during her desperate escape, had begun to throb with an alarming intensity. But she couldn't stop, not when she could still hear the phantom echo of horses' hooves behind her, not when every shadow might hide a bounty hunter eager for the price on her head. The canyon walls rose on either side like ancient sentinels, their red stone faces offering blessed shade, but also trapping the heat. Clara's vision began to blur, whether from exhaustion, blood loss, or the beginning of fever. She couldn't tell. Her water had run out hours ago, and her tongue felt like leather against the roof of her mouth. "Just a little further. Buttercup," she whispered to the mare, though her voice came out as little more than a croak. The horse's ears flicked back at the sound, but its pace had slowed to barely more than a stumble. Then she saw it, a thin ribbon of green cutting through the canyon floor ahead. Cottonwoods, water, hope. Clara leaned forward, trying to guide Buttercup toward the promise of the stream, but the world tilted suddenly. She grabbed for the saddle horn, missed, and felt herself falling through air that seemed thick as molasses. The ground rushed up to meet her, and darkness swallowed everything. The first thing she became aware of was coolness. Blessed, miraculous coolness against her burning skin. Then came the sound of water trickling nearby, and the earthy scent of damp stone. Clara's eyes fluttered open to find herself staring at canvas overhead, golden with filtered sunlight. Panic seized her immediately. She tried to sit up, but firm hands pressed her shoulders back down. "Easy there," a deep voice rumbled. "You've lost a fair amount of blood." Clara's hand flew to her hip, searching for the Remington she'd stolen from her husband's office, but found only the rough wool of a blanket. Her eyes darted wildly until they found the source of the voice, a man sitting on a wooden crate beside her makeshift bed. He was perhaps 40 years old, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of long years under the desert sun. Dark hair, streaked with premature gray, hung past his collar, and a week's worth of stubble covered his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Deep brown, almost black, holding a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. "My gun," she managed to say. "On the table," he replied, nodding toward a rough-hewn surface near the tent's entrance. "Along with your other belongings, they're safe." Clara studied him warily. His clothes were worn but clean, canvas pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. Not the outfit of a lawman or bounty hunter, but she'd learned not to trust appearances. "Who are you?" she asked. "Name's Elijah Hale." He turned away to rinse a cloth in a basin of water. "And before you ask, no, I'm not interested in whatever price they've got on your head." Clara's breath caught. "How did you—" Woman riding alone through Skeleton Canyon, half dead from blood loss and looking over her shoulder every few seconds. He wrung out the cloth and placed it gently on her forehead. "Doesn't take a detective to figure that one out." The cool cloth felt like heaven against her skin, but Clara forced herself to remain alert. "Why help me then?" Elijah was quiet for a long moment, his hands surprisingly gentle as he unwrapped the crude bandage from her arm. Clara bit back a gasp as the fabric pulled away from the wound. "Maybe because I know what it's like to run," he said finally. He examined the gash with a critical eye. "This is infected. I'll need to clean it properly, stitch it up. It's going to hurt." Clara nodded, steeling herself. She'd endured worse. As he worked, she studied his movements. There was a practiced efficiency to the way he cleaned the wound, a steadiness to his hands that spoke of experience. "You're a doctor," she said. It wasn't a question. His hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. "Was during the war." He reached for a leather satchel and withdrew surgical instruments that had seen better days but were meticulously clean. This is going to sting." The carbolic acid burned like fire, and Clara couldn't suppress a sharp cry. Her fingers dug into the blanket, but she didn't pull away. "Sorry," Elijah murmured. "Almost done with the cleaning." Through the haze of pain, Clara watched him thread a needle with steady hands. Union or Confederate? Union, Medical Corps, Army of the Potomac. His voice carried no pride, no nostalgia, just flat statement of fact. "Hold still now." The first pierce of the needle made her gasp, but she bit down on her lip and endured. Elijah worked quickly, his stitches neat and precise despite the crude conditions. When he finally tied off the thread and cut it, Clara realized she'd been holding her breath. "There." He wrapped fresh bandages around her arm, secured them carefully. "That should hold, provided you don't go tearing it open again." Clara flexed her fingers experimentally, relieved to find them responsive despite the pain. "Thank you." Elijah shrugged, already turning away to clean his instruments. "You should rest." "Fever's likely to set in, despite the cleaning. I've got willow bark tea that'll help with the pain and fever both." "I can't stay," Clara said, though even she could hear how weak the protest sounded. "They'll find me." "Nobody's going to find you here." He gestured toward the tent opening. "We're a good 5 miles from the main trail, in a box canyon that's near impossible to spot unless you know it's here. Your horse is watered and fed. She's in worse shape than you, honestly. Neither of you is going anywhere for a few days." Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like quicksand. Still, she had to know. "Why should I trust you?" Elijah paused in his cleaning, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice carried a bitter edge. "Because I'm the last person who'd turn anyone into the law. They want me about as bad as they seem to want you, Miss Clara," she said after a moment's hesitation. No point in lying about her first name. Her wanted posters would have it anyway. "Just Clara." "Well, just Clara," he said, finally turning to face her again. "You're safe here for now. Get some rest. We'll worry about tomorrow when it comes." The willow bark tea was bitter but soothing, and Clara felt the pain begin to ebb as she drank. Through heavy eyelids, she watched Elijah move about the small camp with quiet efficiency. His tent was sparse but organized, medical supplies in one corner, cooking gear in another, a bedroll that looked like it had seen better days. "How long have you been out here?" she asked drowsily. 2 years, give or take." He was checking her horse, running expert hands down its legs. "Move around some, but this canyon's been home for the last 6 months. Alone. Best way to avoid trouble." Clara wanted to ask more. What had driven him to this solitary existence? What crime had set him running? But sleep was pulling her under. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Elijah sitting by the tent entrance, a rifle across his knees, keeping watch over the desert evening, for the first time in weeks. Clara Mitchell slept without fear of who might find her in the night. She didn't yet understand why this stranger had chosen to help her, didn't know what secrets lay behind those weary dark eyes. But instinct, honed by years of reading people's intentions, told her that Elijah Hale meant her no harm. What she couldn't know, drifting into fevered dreams, was that this chance encounter in a hidden canyon would change both their lives forever. That sometimes two broken souls, running from different demons, could find in each other not just temporary shelter, but something neither had dared hope for, a reason to stop running. Outside, the desert cooled under a blanket of stars, and Elijah Hale kept his silent vigil, wondering what twist of fate had brought this wounded woman to his doorstep, and why. For the first time in 2 years, he found himself caring whether a stranger lived or died. The sandstorm arrived on Clara's 3rd day of recovery, announcing itself with a wall of red dust that turned the afternoon sun into a pale ghost. Elijah had seen it coming from miles away, his weathered face grim as he secured the tent flaps and brought the horses into the narrow overhang of rock that served as a stable. "Going to be a bad one," he said, filling every available container with water from the stream. "Could last a day, maybe 2. Clara helped as much as her healing arm would allow. fascinated despite herself by his methodical preparations. He moved with the easy efficiency of someone who had survived many such storms, checking supplies, reinforcing the tent stakes, covering anything that could be damaged by the scouring sand. When the storm hit in earnest, the world outside disappeared into a howling fury of wind and grit. Inside the tent, lit by a single oil lamp, they sat in awkward silence, the forced proximity highlighting how little they knew of each other. "Does it always get this bad?" Clara asked, raising her voice over the wind. "Sometimes worse." Elijah was mending a bridle, his hands steady despite the tent's violent shaking. "Lost a tent once, first year out here. Learned my lesson about proper stakes and site selection." Clara watched him work, noting the careful way he maintained his equipment. Everything in his possession showed the same attention, worn but cared for, patched but functional. It spoke of a man who had learned to depend only on himself. "You were really a doctor?" she ventured. "In the war?" His hands paused for just a moment. "Assistant surgeon, officially. Though by Antietam, we were all just trying to keep boys from dying." He resumed his work. "Learn more about the human body's capacity for damage in 4 years than in all my medical training combined." There was something in his voice, not self-pity, but a bone-deep weariness that Clara recognized. She'd heard it in her own voice these past months. "Is that why you're out here? Something that happened in the war?" Elijah set down the bridle and poured himself coffee from the pot, keeping warm on the small camp stove. He offered her a cup, which she accepted gratefully. "No," he said after a long pause. "The war ended. I went back to practicing in Missouri. Had a small clinic in Jefferson City." He stared into his coffee. "What happened came later." Clara waited, sensing there was more. The wind howled around them, but inside the tent, there was only the hiss of the oil lamp and the weight of unspoken words. "There was an Indian woman," Elijah continued, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Pawnee found her on the outskirts of town, beaten near to death. Some upstanding citizens decided she'd stolen from the general store." His jaw tightened. She hadn't, but that didn't matter to them. Clara's own fingers tightened around her cup. She knew too well how quickly innocence could be discarded when convenient. "I treated her," Elijah said simply. "Kept her hidden in my clinic until she could travel. When they found out," he shrugged. "Treating an Indian woman, hiding her from justice, that made me a traitor in their eyes. The war might have been about freeing slaves, but that didn't mean folks were ready to see Indians as human. They came for you? With torches and righteous fury." A bitter smile touched his lips. "I got out just ahead of the mob. Been moving west ever since. Turns out there's not much call for a doctor who's been branded a race traitor." Clara absorbed this, understanding now the wariness in his eyes, the careful way he'd approached her that first day. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'd do it again." He met her eyes directly. She lived. That's what mattered. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the storm rage. Finally, Clara found herself speaking, words pulled out by something in his quiet acceptance. "The scar on my shoulder," she said softly. "You asked about it when the fever was bad." Elijah nodded but didn't press. "My husband put it there, with a branding iron from his ranch." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "Said it was so I'd never forget who I belonged to." Elijah's knuckles went white around his cup, but his voice remained steady. "He the one you're running from? He's dead now." Clara stared at the tent wall, seeing another place, another time. "Shot in his own office. They say I did it." "Did you?" The question was asked without judgment, just quiet curiosity. Clara found herself almost smiling. "No. Though God knows I thought about it often enough." She set down her cup, unconsciously rubbing her shoulder. "He was powerful. Owned the biggest ranch in the county. Had the sheriff in his pocket. When I tried to leave the first time, he had me brought back, said a wife's place was with her husband, and everyone agreed." The wind picked up, sending sand hissing against the canvas. Elijah added more oil to the lamp. "What changed?" he asked. "He killed a man, a drifter who'd smiled at me in town. Shot him in cold blood. Claimed the man was rustling cattle." Clara's voice hardened. "I saw it happen. Saw him plant the evidence after, when I said I'd testify. He laughed. Said no one would believe a hysterical woman over the deputy sheriff. But someone did kill him. One of his own men, I think. He had plenty of enemies, but I was the convenient scapegoat. The unhappy wife, the troublemaker." She looked at Elijah. "So I ran. Been running for 2 months now." "Where were you headed?" "Mexico. Maybe somewhere the wanted posters don't reach." She laughed bitterly. "Though I'm starting to think there's no such place." Elijah was quiet for a long moment, then rose and went to his medical bag. He returned with a small cloth bundle, which he unwrapped to reveal a Colt Navy revolver, well maintained despite its age. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her hands. "It's more reliable than that Remington you're carrying, and lighter too. Better for a woman's hand." Clara stared at the weapon, then at him. "I can't. This is yours. I've got others, and you need it more than I do." He showed her the basics of its operation, his hands sure and patient. 6 shots, .36 caliber. Won't stop a man like a .44, but it'll make them think twice. Keep it loaded, but the hammer on an empty chamber. The gesture, practical yet somehow intimate, made Clara's throat tight. When was the last time someone had shown her kindness without expecting something in return? The storm continued through the night and into the next day. They passed the time with small conversations, sharing carefully edited pieces of their pasts. Elijah told her about his childhood in Ohio, his decision to study medicine, the professor who'd encouraged him. Clara spoke of growing up on a small farm in Kansas, her love of horses, the books she'd read in secret when her father thought education wasted on women. Neither spoke of love or happiness. Those seemed to belong to other people's stories. On the second night of the storm, Clara woke gasping from a nightmare, her husband's face vivid in the darkness. She sat up, heart racing, to find Elijah already awake, watching her with those deep, careful eyes. "Bad dream?" he asked simply. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He rose and made tea, the familiar ritual soothing in its ordinariness. They sat side by side in the lamplight, not touching but aware of each other, while the storm began to blow itself out. "I see them sometimes," Elijah said quietly, "the ones I couldn't save, boys who died under my knife, calling for their mothers." He stared into his tea. "Wonder sometimes if saving lives balances out the ones lost. Never seem to come to an answer." Clara found herself reaching out, placing her hand briefly over his. "The woman you saved, the Pawnee woman, she lived because of you. That has to count for something." He looked at their hands, his expression unreadable. Maybe. When dawn came, the storm had passed, leaving the world scoured clean and strange. They emerged from the tent like survivors from a shipwreck, blinking in the harsh light. The landscape had changed, dunes shifted and familiar markers erased, but Elijah navigated with the confidence of long practice as they worked together to dig out equipment and check on the horses. Clara found herself watching him with new eyes, not as a threat or even a savior, but as a fellow traveler on a hard road. The careful distance between them had shifted during the storm, replaced by something that might, in time, become trust. "I should leave soon," she said as they watered the horses at the stream, now running muddy from the storm. "The weather's clear, and Buttercup's recovered. I've imposed on you long enough." Elijah was quiet for a moment, checking the mare's legs with professional thoroughness. "The infection's not fully healed. You tear those stitches. Could go bad fast. I'll be careful. And if they catch up to you, can you draw that colt with your arm still healing?" Clara didn't answer, knowing he was right but unable to shake the feeling that staying endangered them both. "They'll track me here eventually. I won't bring that down on you. Let them come." There was steel in his voice now. "Wouldn't be the first time I've dealt with men who think might makes right." Their eyes met across the horse's back, And Clara saw in his face the same stubborn protectiveness that had led him to save an Indian woman. Consequences be damned. It scared her. How much she wanted to accept that protection, to rest for just a while in the shelter of someone else's strength. A few more days, she conceded finally. Until the arm's better. Elijah nodded, satisfied, and turned back to the horses. But Clara caught the brief smile that touched his lips, there and gone like a shadow. It transformed his face, hinting at the man he might have been before life marked him with its hardships. As they walked back to camp together, the sun climbing toward its zenith, Clara found herself hoping those few days might stretch just a little longer. In this hidden canyon, with this quiet, damaged man, she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. A moment of peace in a world that seemed determined to deny her any. The desert spread endless around them, harsh and unforgiving. But for now, it felt almost like sanctuary. The fever came in the deep of night, swift and vicious as a rattlesnake's strike. Clara had seemed fine at supper, perhaps a bit quiet, but Elijah attributed that to the healing process. When her screams woke him, he found her thrashing in her bedroll, skin burning hot, the carefully healing wound an angry red despite his ministrations. "Samuel, no, please," she moaned, lost in delirium. "I won't tell. I swear I won't tell." Elijah worked through the night, drawing on every skill learned in field hospitals where infection killed more men than bullets. He bathed her with cool water, forced willow bark tea between her lips, and changed the poultice on her wound every hour. But the fever raged on, and with it came the broken fragments of her story. The blood, so much blood. Marshall Garrett. You have to believe me. By dawn, Elijah was exhausted but grimly determined. He'd lost too many patients to fever, watched too many slip away while he stood helpless. Not this one. Not Clara. On the second day of her fever, she opened her eyes and looked at him with startling clarity. "You're still here," she whispered. "Where else would I be?" He helped her sip water, supporting her head gently. "Everyone leaves." Her eyes drifted shut again. "Or dies. That's how it goes. Not this time," he said firmly, though she was already sliding back into delirium. The fever broke on the third night, leaving Clara weak as a newborn foal but lucid. She woke to find Elijah asleep in his chair beside her, his head pillowed on his arms, one hand still resting near hers as if he'd been holding it. The sight made her chest tight with an emotion she didn't care to examine. When she tried to sit up, he woke instantly, doctor's instincts intact despite his exhaustion. "Easy," he said, helping her upright. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of mustangs." Her voice was hoarse, throat raw. "How long?" "3 days. You've been fighting quite a battle." He checked her forehead, nodded satisfaction. "Fever's broken properly now. You'll mend." Clara caught his hand as he moved to pull away. "What I said, in the fever." "You mentioned Samuel, your husband." She nodded, looking away. "Samuel Cray, deputy sheriff of Sagebrush County." The words came slowly, as if she were pulling them from some deep place. "I was 17 when we married. He was 35, established, respected. My father thought it a fine match." Elijah said nothing, just held her hand and waited. He was charming at first, attentive. It wasn't until after the wedding that I learned what he truly was. She unconsciously touched her shoulder, where the scar lay hidden. He liked control, over the town, over his men, over me, especially over me. The man he killed, Tom Haskins, a drifter, like I said, young, maybe 20. He helped me with my packages outside the mercantile, smiled and tipped his hat, that's all. Her voice hardened. Samuel saw. That night, he rode out with 2 of his men. They brought Tom back draped over a saddle, claimed he'd been caught with running irons and rustled cattle. But you saw what really happened. I followed them, watched from the ridge as they shot him down like a dog. He was unarmed, begging. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. I tried to go to Marshall Garrett the next day, but Samuel had already been there. Told him I was hysterical. unseemly in my grief over a criminal's justified death, that I'd been acting strange since I lost the baby. Elijah's hand tightened on hers. Baby. Months before, Samuel's temper. She trailed off, then forced herself to continue. The doctor said I'd likely never carry another child to term. Samuel blamed me, of course, said I was worthless as a wife. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken rage on her behalf. Finally, Elijah spoke, his voice carefully controlled. Who did kill him? I don't know. I came home from the mercantile and found him in his study, shot twice in the chest. His safe was open, empty. Could have been someone he was blackmailing. Could have been one of his own men who'd had enough. She met his eyes. I ran, took Buttercup and what money I could find and ran. They were already saying it was me before I reached the town limits. Because you'd tried to report him. A wife who speaks against her husband, who refuses to know her place. Clara laughed bitterly. Of course it was me. Who else would dare? Elijah stood abruptly, pacing to the tent entrance. His shoulders were rigid with tension. When he turned back, his face was composed, but Clara could see the anger burning in his eyes. My wife died, he said suddenly. Margaret, during the war, while I was playing surgeon in Virginia. He returned to his chair, movements sharp. Cholera outbreak in Jefferson City. I got the letter 2 weeks after she'd been buried. She died calling for me, and I was elbow deep in some soldier's intestines, trying to keep him alive long enough to die from infection instead of blood loss. Clara squeezed his hand, understanding the gift of this confidence, the trust it represented. That's why I couldn't let the Pawnee woman die. He continued. I'd failed Margaret, failed so many. When I found her, beaten and broken, all I could think was, not this one, this one. I save. He looked at Clara. Same with you. Maybe that makes me a fool. No, Clara said softly. It makes you human. The moment stretched between them, fragile and profound. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they pulled back, retreating to safer ground. Elijah made broth. Clara managed to keep it down, and they spoke of inconsequential things until she drifted back to sleep. Over the next days, as Clara regained her strength, their relationship shifted into something new. The careful distance of strangers had burned away in the fever's heat, replaced by a tentative intimacy. They worked side by side, Elijah teaching her which plants could heal and which could harm. Clara showing him how to read the subtle signs of approaching riders in the horse's behavior. One evening, as they sat by the fire watching the stars emerge, Clara found herself speaking thoughts she'd barely admitted to herself. I used to dream of love, she said quietly. When I was young, read novels my mother had hidden away. Imagined someone who'd look at me like I was precious. She poked at the fire with a stick. Samuel cured me of that foolishness quick enough. It's not foolishness to want kindness, Elijah said. To want to be seen as more than property. Isn't it, in this world? She gestured at the harsh landscape around them. Seems like softness is just another word for weakness out here. Maybe, or maybe it takes more strength to stay soft in a hard world than to let it turn you to stone. Clara looked at him across the fire. This man who'd doctored enemies and friends alike, who'd risked everything for a stranger's life, who'd spent 3 days fighting for her survival, asking nothing in return. Is that what you've done? Stayed soft? I've tried, not always succeeded. He met her gaze, harder to do alone. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Clara's heart raced, but before she could respond, a coyote's howl split the night, and the moment passed. The next morning brought new challenges. They were running low on supplies, and Elijah would need to ride to the trading post 2 days north. The thought of him leaving, even temporarily, filled Clara with unexpected anxiety. I should go with you, she said as he prepared for the journey. Safer together. Your face is on wanted posters from here to the Colorado line, he reminded her gently. Better you stay hidden. She knew he was right, but the prospect of waiting alone in the canyon gnawed at her. What if he didn't come back? What if someone recognized him, connected him to her, as if reading her thoughts? Elijah paused in checking his rifle. "I'll be back in 4 days, 5 at most. There's enough food, and you know where the spring is. Keep the colt close and trust the horses to warn you of strangers. I'm not worried about myself. I know." He smiled, that rare expression that transformed him. "But I've survived this long. I'll manage a supply run." Clara watched him saddle his horse, memorizing the efficient movements, the way the morning light caught in his hair. When he mounted up, she couldn't help herself. "Elijah." He turned back. "Be careful. And come back." Something shifted in his expression, a softening that made him look younger despite the lines etched by hardship. "I will. You have my word." She stood at the canyon entrance long after the dust of his passing had settled, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart beat a rhythm she'd thought it had forgotten. The smart thing would be to leave while he was gone, to spare them both the pain of whatever was building between them. But as she turned back to the empty camp, Clara knew she would wait. For once in her life, she would stay. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows on the canyon walls. And somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried its lonely call. Clara checked the colt at her hip and went to tend the horses, counting the hours until Elijah's return. The morning mist clung to the canyon floor like a gossamer veil as Clara and Elijah made their way along the narrow deer trail. They were searching for desert marigold and Apache plume, medicinal plants Elijah needed to replenish his supplies. The air held that peculiar coolness of early dawn in the high desert, a blessed respite before the day's heat took hold. There, Elijah pointed to a cluster of yellow blooms nestled against a boulder. "Marigold, good for wounds that won't heal clean." Clara knelt beside him as he showed her how to harvest the plants properly, leaving enough for regrowth. Their shoulders brushed, and she was acutely aware of his presence, the soap and leather scent of him, the gentle precision of his hands. "You could have been a teacher," she said, watching him work. "You explain things well." Thought about it once, after Margaret died. He carefully placed the harvested plants in his gathering bag. But teaching requires staying in one place. They worked in companionable silence, moving deeper into a side canyon where the plants grew thick. The sun climbed higher, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and amber. Clara had almost forgotten to be watchful, lulled by the peace of the morning and Elijah's steady presence. That's when she heard it, the distinctive dry rattle that made every Western dweller's blood run cold. The rattlesnake lay coiled in the shadow of a flat rock, directly in her path. Clara froze, her hand halfway extended toward a flowering plant. The snake's head was raised, tongue flicking, its rattle a steady warning. "Don't move," Elijah said quietly from behind her. "Just breathe easy." But as Clara tried to ease backward, her boot caught on a root. She stumbled, and the snake struck with a lightning speed. She felt the impact on her calf, even through the leather of her boot, and cried out more in shock than pain. Elijah moved faster than she'd ever seen him move, yanking her backward and drawing his knife in one fluid motion. The snake, having delivered its warning, slithered away into the rocks. "Let me see." His hands were already working at her bootlaces, his face grim. When he pulled the boot away, they both saw the puncture marks on her calf, blood already beading. "The boot took most of it," Clara said, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "Maybe the fangs didn't—" "Hush!" Elijah was already cutting away her trouser leg, examining the wound with intense focus. The punctures were shallow, but already the skin around them was reddening. Some venom got through, not a full dose, but enough. Without hesitation, he bent his head to the wound. Clara gasped as she felt his mouth on her skin, the intimate shock of it momentarily overwhelming even her fear. He sucked hard at the puncture marks, turning to spit blood and venom onto the ground, then returning to repeat the process. "Elijah, no, what if you—" "Quiet," he commanded between sessions, his usual gentle manner replaced by urgent authority. "Need to get as much out as possible." For long minutes he worked, until Clara felt dizzy, whether from the venom or the sensation of his ministrations. She couldn't tell. When he finally sat back, wiping his mouth, his eyes were dark with concern. "We need to get you back to camp. Can you ride?" Clara nodded, though already she could feel a strange tingling spreading from the wound. Elijah helped her stand, supporting most of her weight, and half carried her to where they'd left the horses. He lifted her onto Buttercup as if she weighed nothing, then vaulted onto his own mount. The ride back seemed endless. Clara gripped the saddle horn, fighting waves of nausea as the venom worked through her system. By the time they reached camp, she could barely stay upright. Elijah carried her to the tent, laying her gently on the bedroll. His movements were swift but controlled as he prepared treatments, poultices of plantain and echinacea, willow bark tea extra strong, clean bandages. "This is going to be a hard few hours," he said, meeting her eyes. "The venom's going to make you sick, maybe delirious, but you're going to be fine. I've seen much worse snake bites. And this one—" He attempted a reassuring smile. "This one barely broke the skin proper." Clara reached up and touched his face, surprised by her own boldness. "You sucked the venom out. You could have been poisoned." "Small risk." He caught her hand, pressed it briefly. "Now rest. Let the medicine work." The next hours passed in a haze of fever and chills. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of Elijah's constant presence, cool cloths on her forehead, strong hands helping her sip water, his voice a steady anchor when the delirium threatened to pull her under. In her fevered dreams, she was back in Samuel's house. But instead of her husband's cruel face, it was Elijah who found her hiding in the root cellar. Elijah who carried her into the light. She woke, calling his name. "I'm here." He was immediately beside her, checking her temperature, her pulse. "You're doing fine. The worst is passing." "Don't leave," she whispered, clutching at his shirt. "I'm not going anywhere." As the venom worked its way out of her system, Clara found herself studying him in the lamplight. The deep lines around his eyes, the way his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned forward, the careful gentleness of his hands. When had this quiet, wounded man become essential to her? "Why do you keep saving me?" she asked when the fog finally cleared enough for coherent thought. Elijah paused in wringing out a cloth. "Maybe I'm saving myself." "What do you mean?" He sat back, considering. "Been 2 years since I touched another person with healing intent. 2 years of hiding, keeping my distance, trying not to care." He met her eyes. "Then you fell off that horse, bleeding and burning with fever. And suddenly I remembered why I became a doctor in the first place. To save lives. To matter. To make a difference. Even a small one." He resumed his ministrations. "You gave that back to me." Clara caught his hand. "Is that all I am? A chance to practice medicine again?" "You know better than that." The air between them crackled with tension. Clara's heart hammered, but not from the snake bite. Elijah leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. For a moment, they hovered on the precipice. Then he kissed her. It was nothing like Samuel's possessive claims of ownership. This was gentle, almost reverent, a question rather than a demand. Clara responded without thought, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. He tasted of herbs and coffee, of loneliness ended and hope discovered. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Elijah rested his forehead against hers. "I'm sorry," he began, but Clara silenced him with a finger to his lips. "Don't apologize. Not for that. Never for that." He searched her face. "Clara, we're both running. Both damaged. This can't— I know." She stroked his cheek, feeling the rasp of stubble. "I know all the reasons this is impossible, but just for tonight, can we pretend otherwise?" Elijah was still for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he extinguished the lamp. In the darkness, Clara heard him stretch out beside her on the narrow bedroll. She turned into his arms, feeling safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. They didn't make love. She was still too weak from the snake bite, and perhaps the moment was too fragile for such intimacy. But they held each other through the night, sharing warmth and whispered confessions. Elijah told her about the nightmares that woke him, the faces of boys he'd failed to save. Clara spoke of the baby she'd lost, the child who might have been her reason to endure Samuel's cruelty a little longer. "Do you think we're fools?" Clara asked as dawn light began to filter through the canvas. Two broken people trying to piece together something whole. "Maybe." Elijah's arms tightened around her. "But I'd rather be a fool with you than wise alone." They rose with the sun, moving carefully around each other, aware that something fundamental had shifted. As Elijah checked her snakebite, healing clean, the swelling already reduced, his touch lingered longer than medicinal need required. "You should be able to ride in another day or two," he said, rewrapping the bandage. "And go where?" The question hung between them. "Mexico's still the safest option. I could—" He paused, then forged ahead. "I could draw you a map. Mark the water sources, the safe paths." A map. Clara stood, testing her leg. It held, though she still felt weak. "That's very practical." "Clara," she turned to face him. "What if I don't want to go alone?" The hope that flared in his eyes was quickly shuttered. "You know what I am, a wanted man with nothing to offer but a life of hiding. And what am I? A woman accused of murder, chased by the law and bounty hunters alike?" She stepped closer. "At least together, we'd have someone watching our backs." "It's not that simple." A horse's whinny cut through his words. Not one of theirs. The sound came from beyond the canyon mouth. Instantly, both tensed. Elijah grabbed his rifle, moving to the canyon entrance with Clara close behind. "Stay back," he whispered. But she already had the Colt in her hand. They waited, barely breathing, as the sounds grew closer. Multiple horses moving slowly, searching. Clara's mouth went dry. After all this time, had they finally been found? A figure appeared at the canyon entrance, a lone rider, weathered and trail-worn, leading two pack horses. Elijah relaxed fractionally. "Jonas," he called out. "Wasn't expecting you for another month." The trader, a grizzled man in his 60s with kind eyes, raised a hand in greeting. "Heard at the post there was a lady needed some proper clothes. Figured I'd swing by early." His gaze found Clara, took in her torn trousers and oversized borrowed shirt. "Ma'am, Jonas Wheeler, at your service." Clara lowered the Colt, pulse still racing. "How did you—" "I mentioned you needed supplies when I was at the trading post last week." Elijah explained. "Jonas is trustworthy. He's kept my secret for 2 years." The old trader dismounted, stretching his back. "Brought some dresses, boots, ladies' necessaries. Also news from town, if you're wanting to hear it." Clara and Elijah exchanged glances. News could mean danger, but ignorance was worse. "What kind of news?" Elijah asked. Jonas's expression grew serious. "That business up in Sagebrush, the deputy that got killed? Well, seems they caught the real killer. One of his own men, like the lady probably suspected. Fellow named Wade Harkins confessed everything, including framing the deputy's wife." Clara's knees nearly buckled. Elijah caught her arm, steadying her. "You're certain?" "Certain as sunrise. They hanged Harkins 3 days ago. Marshals put out word that Mrs. Cray is cleared of all charges." Jonas looked at Clara with sympathy. "You're free, ma'am." "Least as far as the law's concerned." "Free?" The word echoed in Clara's mind like a foreign language. After months of running, of looking over her shoulder, of expecting each day to be her last, she was free. She looked at Elijah, saw her own shock mirrored in his face. If she was free, she could go anywhere. Start over in a place where no one knew her past. She didn't need to hide in Mexico. She didn't need him anymore. The realization hung between them like a wall suddenly erected. Jonas, sensing the tension, busied himself with unpacking supplies, whistling tunelessly. "Well," Elijah said finally, his voice carefully neutral. That's wonderful news. You can go home." "Home?" Clara laughed bitterly. "To what? Samuel sold my father's farm to pay gambling debts. Everyone in Sagebrush thinks I'm a murderer. Cleared or not, I have no home." "You could make one, anywhere you choose." San Francisco, Denver, even back east. He wasn't looking at her now. You're young, beautiful. You could remarry, have the life you deserve. The life I deserve. She repeated the words slowly. And what life do you think I deserve? Elijah? He finally met her eyes, and the pain there took her breath away. Better than hiding in canyons with a broken-down former doctor who can't even use his real name in public. Before Clara could respond, Jonas cleared his throat. Brought something else you might find interesting. Doc, letter from Jefferson City. Seems there's been some changes there too. He handed over a worn envelope. Elijah opened it with hands that trembled slightly, read quickly, then read again more slowly. When he looked up, his face was stunned. The woman I helped, her husband was a territorial judge. He's been working to clear my name. Says there's a town in Colorado that needs a doctor. No questions asked about the past. He held out the letter to Clara. I could practice again, legally. 2 freedoms, offered in the space of minutes. 2 paths suddenly open where before there had been only one. Clara took the letter, read the formal language that gave Elijah back his life. Colorado, she said softly. You could come with me, he said in a rush. If you wanted, that is, we could. He stopped, took a breath. What I'm trying to say is, I love you. I know we've only known each other a short time, but Clara, you've brought me back to life, if you'll have me. I want to spend whatever years I have left proving myself worthy of you. Jonas had made himself scarce, suddenly very interested in checking his horse's hooves. Clara stood frozen, the letter clutched in her hands, looking at this man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved. You don't have to answer now, Elijah said quickly. I know it's sudden. You've got options now, choices. I just wanted you to know that one of those choices could be us. Clara set down the letter and stepped forward, framing his face with her hands. Elijah Hale, you impossible, wonderful man. Don't you know I made my choice that night you kissed me? Hope dawned in his eyes. Clara, I love you too, and if you'll have a notorious former accused murderess as your wife, I'd be honored to go to Colorado with you. He caught her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed, her wounded leg protesting but her heart soaring. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. Well, Jonas said, reappearing with impeccable timing. Seems like I ought to be offering congratulations. Also got a nice bottle of whiskey in those packs, if you're wanting to celebrate proper-like. As the sun set over the canyon that had been their sanctuary, 3 unlikely friends shared whiskey and stories around the campfire. Tomorrow would bring preparations for departure, the journey to a new life in Colorado. There would be challenges ahead, gossip to face, a practice to build. The ordinary trials of 2 people learning to live as one. But tonight, Clara sat in the circle of Elijah's arms, watching the stars emerge in the vast western sky, and knew she was finally, truly free. Not just from the law or from Samuel's shadow, but from the fear that she would never be loved for who she truly was. Beside her, Elijah pressed a kiss to her temple and whispered, Thank you. For what? For falling off that horse, for needing rescue, for rescuing me right back. Clara turned in his arms, meeting his lips with hers, and tasted their future in that kiss, bright and possible as the morning star rising in the east. The days blurred together in a haze of pain and fevered dreams. Elijah drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the burning in his belly where the bullet had torn through flesh and the gentle hands that tended him. Sometimes he thought he was back in the field hospitals of Virginia, surrounded by the screams of dying men. Other times he knew exactly where he was, hidden in a cave in the canyon walls, with Clara fighting to save his life as he had once fought for hers. You're not leaving me, he heard her whisper fiercely during one of his lucid moments. Do you hear me, Elijah Hale? You don't get to save me and then die on me. That's not how this story ends. He wanted to tell her that stories like theirs rarely had happy endings, that men like him were meant to die violent deaths in lonely places. But his throat was too dry, his voice lost somewhere in the fever. so he could only watch through slitted eyes as she worked over him with trembling hands. Clara had dragged him into the cave after the gunfight, somehow finding strength she didn't know she possessed. The two bounty hunters lay dead in the canyon below, but Elijah had taken a bullet meant for her. Now she fought her own war against infection and blood loss, using the supplies from his medical bag and every lesson he'd taught her. The carbolic acid, she muttered to herself, hands shaking as she cleaned the wound again. Keep it clean. Change the dressings every 4 hours. Willow bark for the fever. She'd had to extract the bullet herself, working by lamplight with instruments she'd sterilized in boiling water. Her hands had shaken so badly she'd had to stop twice, overwhelmed by the sight of his blood on her fingers. But she'd done it, following his mumbled instructions when he'd been conscious enough to give them. Now, 3 days later, she maintained a constant vigil. She'd ventured out only to tend the horses, gather water, and set snares for small game. The dried beans and jerky from their supplies had to be stretched, made into thin broths that she spooned between his lips whenever he could swallow. "Clara!" His voice was barely a whisper, but she was instantly beside him. "I'm here." She touched his forehead, checking the fever. Still too warm, but better than yesterday. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," he managed, attempting a smile. "Don't joke." But relief lightened her exhausted features. "You've been unconscious for hours. I was starting to think—" She trailed off, unable to voice her fears. "Takes more than one bullet to kill a stubborn fool." He tried to sit up, gasped at the pain that lanced through him. "The bounty hunters? Dead. I buried them in a shallow grave downstream." Her voice hardened. "They won't be reporting our location to anyone." Elijah studied her face, seeing new lines etched by worry and determination. Her hair hung loose and tangled. Her dress, one of the ones Jonas had brought, was stained with blood and dirt. She looked nothing like the terrified woman he'd found in the desert weeks ago. She looked like a survivor. "You saved my life," he said softly, returning the favor. She helped him sip water, her touch infinitely gentle. "Though your bedside manner is considerably better than mine." "You did fine." "Better than fine." He caught her hand. "But Clara, if more come, then I'll deal with them too." The fierce protectiveness in her voice made his chest tight. "I'm not leaving you, Elijah. Not now. Not ever." The next days passed in a strange rhythm. Clara had become the caretaker, Elijah the patient. She changed his dressings with increasing confidence, brewed medicinal teas from the plants he'd taught her to recognize, even managed to shoot a rabbit to make strengthening broth. "You're a natural healer," Elijah told her one evening as she checked his wound. The edges were finally starting to knit properly, the angry red fading to pink. "I had a good teacher." She rebandaged his abdomen with practiced movements. "Though I prefer it when you're the doctor and I'm the assistant." "So do I." He caught her chin gently, tilting her face toward him. "You look exhausted. When's the last time you slept properly?" "I rest when you rest." "Liar." But he said it fondly. "Come here." She stretched out beside him on the narrow bedroll, careful not to jostle his wound. Elijah pulled her close with his good arm, feeling the tension slowly leave her body. "I was so scared," she admitted in the darkness. "When you fell, when I saw the blood, I thought I was going to lose you." "You didn't. You won't." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "We've come too far to give up now." By the end of the week, Elijah could sit up without the world spinning. Clara had fashioned a crutch from a sturdy branch, and he managed short walks around the cave, building his strength. She hovered nearby, ready to catch him if he faltered, but he could see the relief in her eyes at his progress. One morning, Clara woke to find Elijah already up, sitting at the cave entrance with his journal. "You're writing?" She joined him, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders against the dawn chill. "Making notes. About the treatment, the healing process." He showed her the pages covered in his neat script. Medical knowledge shouldn't be wasted, even from something like this. Clara read over his shoulder, marveling at his ability to find learning in suffering. Ever the doctor. It's who I am. He set the journal aside, pulled her closer. Just as you're a fighter, we make a good team. The doctor and the outlaw's widow. She smiled sadly. What a pair we are. The healer and the survivor. He corrected. And soon, husband and wife. If you'll still have me after all this, Elijah Hale. If you think a little thing like getting shot is going to scare me off, you don't know me as well as you think. He laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his healing wound. I'm beginning to realize I've greatly underestimated you. Clara Mitchell, soon to be Hale. They spent the morning planning their future, the trip to Colorado, the practice he would establish, the life they would build together. It seemed almost fantastical, discussing normal things like houses and gardens while hiding in a cave. Him still weak from a gunshot wound, but the mundane details gave them something to hold on to, a reason to keep fighting. That afternoon, while Elijah napped, Clara ventured out to check her snares and gather more medicinal plants. The desert was quiet, peaceful even, with no sign of other riders. She'd begun to hope they might have truly escaped, that the death of the two bounty hunters had ended their pursuit. She was wrong. Clara spotted the dust cloud first. Too large to be a single rider, too purposeful to be random travelers. Her heart hammered as she raced back to the cave, grabbing what supplies she could carry. Elijah, wake up! We have to move. He was instantly alert, reaching for his gun. How many? I don't know. 4, maybe 5 riders, still a few miles out but heading this way. They worked with desperate efficiency, packing only essentials. Elijah gritted his teeth against the pain as Clara helped him onto his horse, blood already seeping through the bandages from the exertion. The higher caves, he gasped. Harder to reach but more defensible. They climbed, the horses struggling on the narrow paths. Behind them, the dust cloud grew closer. Clara could make out individual riders now, the glint of metal that meant weapons. They reached a shallow cave high on the canyon wall just as the first shouts echoed below. Clara helped Elijah inside, then turned back to watch their pursuers mill about at the abandoned campsite. They'll find us, Elijah said grimly. This wound slowed us too much. Then we make our stand here. Clara checked the Colt he'd given her, then the Winchester rifle. At least we have the high ground. A voice called up from below, harsh, authoritative. Mrs. Cray! We know you're up there. Come down peaceful-like, and we might let your friend live. Clara recognized the voice with a chill. Wade Harkins, Samuel's right-hand man. The one who'd helped frame her, but Jonas had said he'd been hanged. Seems rumors of my death were a bit premature. Harkins called, as if reading her thoughts. Paid the hangman to use a trick noose. Had my boys cut me down soon as the crowd dispersed. Been tracking you ever since. What do you want? Clara called back. What's mine? Sam promised me half his holdings if anything happened to him. Can't collect with his widow still breathing. Beside her, Elijah struggled to sit up, his face gray with pain but determined. How many rounds do we have? Not enough. Clara met his eyes, but maybe enough to make it costly for them. Clara, listen to me. When the shooting starts, you run, take the back path, get to— I told you, I'm not leaving. She positioned herself at the cave mouth, rifle ready. We do this together or not at all? The first shot shattered the morning quiet, chipping rock near Clara's head. She returned fire, forcing the attackers to take cover. Elijah dragged himself forward, adding his pistol to their defense despite the agony each movement caused. For long minutes, gunfire echoed through the canyon. Clara's world narrowed to the rhythm of aim. Fire, reload. She winged one attacker, saw him fall back clutching his shoulder, but there were too many, and their ammunition wouldn't last. Clara! Elijah gasped. He was pale as paper now, fresh blood soaking through his shirt. I need you to listen. Another volley of shots cut him off. Clara heard boots on stone. They were climbing, flanking their position. She grabbed Elijah's hand, squeezing hard. I love you, she said fiercely. And I love you. Which is why the attack came from two directions at once. Clara spun, firing at shapes in the cave mouth, but knew they were overwhelmed. A rifle butt caught her shoulder, sending her weapon flying. She reached for the Colt, but hands grabbed her, dragging her away from Elijah. No! She fought viciously, all wild desperation, but there were too many. Harkins stood over Elijah, gun pointed at his head. Well now, this is convenient. Get to watch you die before I finish your woman. Wait. Elijah's voice was steady despite everything. I know where Samuel Cray hid his money. All of it. Harkins paused. Sam didn't have any hidden money. 50,000 in gold certificates. He was skimming from the town treasury for years. Elijah met Clara's eyes briefly. A message there she couldn't read. I treated him once, privately. He was drunk, talked too much. I know where it is. You're lying. Maybe. Kill me now and you'll never know. Elijah struggled to sit straighter. Let her go, and I'll tell you everything. Elijah, no. Clara breathed. Harkins considered, greed warring with bloodlust in his eyes. Tell me first. Let her go first. That's the deal. You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Doc. True. Elijah coughed, specks of blood on his lips. But I'm the only one who knows where 50,000 in gold is hidden. Your choice, revenge or riches. The standoff stretched taut. Clara could see Elijah weakening, the toll of his bluff written in every line of his body. But his eyes remained steady on Harkins, willing the man to take the bait. Finally, Harkins nodded to his men. Let her go, but if you're lying, Doc, I'll track her down and make her death last days. Elijah, please! Clara struggled against the hands releasing her. Don't do this. Go, he said softly. Live, be happy. That's all I want. How touching. Harkins gestured impatiently. Get her out of here. Now. Doc, about that gold. Clara was dragged away, Elijah's voice growing faint as he spun an elaborate tale of hidden treasure. She fought every step, screaming his name, but the men were too strong. They shoved her onto Buttercup, slapped the horse's rump, sending it galloping down the trail. She pulled up as soon as she was out of sight, wheeling back. But gunshots echoed through the canyon, sharp, final. Clara's scream of anguish sent birds exploding from the cliff sides. No, no, no! She kicked Buttercup forward, desperate to get back, to fight, to die beside him if necessary. But as she rounded the bend, she saw Harkins and his men already mounting up, heading her way. There was nothing she could do. No way to fight four armed men. Elijah was gone, had given his life for hers, and all she could do was run. Clara fled through the canyon, tears blinding her. Elijah's last words echoing in her mind. Live, be happy. How could she be happy when her heart lay dead in a cave, when the only man who'd ever truly loved her had traded his life for hers? But she rode on, because to do otherwise would make his sacrifice meaningless. Behind her, shouts indicated pursuit had begun again. Harkins wouldn't be satisfied with just Elijah's death, not when there was no gold to find. Clara leaned low over Buttercup's neck, urging the mare faster, but she could hear them gaining. That's when she saw them, a full troop of cavalry cresting the ridge ahead, starred and striped guidon fluttering in the desert wind. Clara didn't hesitate. She rode straight for them, waving frantically. Help, please, murderers behind me! The cavalry responded instantly, spurring forward to intercept. Within minutes, Harkins and his men found themselves surrounded by armed soldiers, forced to throw down their weapons. A young lieutenant helped Clara from her horse. Ma'am, are you hurt? My fiancé, she gasped out. They shot him, back in the canyon. Please, someone has to... But even as she spoke, she knew it was too late. Elijah was gone. The knowledge hit her like a physical blow, and she collapsed, sobbing, as the soldiers dealt with her pursuers. Later, she would learn that the cavalry had been specifically looking for Wade Harkins, wanted for escaping execution and multiple murders. Her testimony would see him properly hanged this time, along with his men. Justice, of a sort. But standing in that canyon as soldiers recovered Elijah's body, Clara felt only emptiness. He'd saved her again. One last time, and she had nothing left to give him but her tears and a promise whispered to the desert wind. "I'll live, Elijah, I'll live for both of us, but I'll never stop loving you." The sun set red as blood over the canyon, and Clara turned her face toward Colorado, carrying her grief and her love like sacred things into an uncertain future. The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger, resolving into a group of riders moving with grim purpose. Clara's heart sank as she recognized the lead figure, Matthew Cray, Samuel's younger brother, wearing the badge of a federal marshal now. Behind him rode 6 men, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of those who made their living hunting people. "Inside," Elijah said quietly, but Clara shook her head. "Running will only make it worse. Besides, you're in no condition to ride hard." They stood together in front of Elijah's tent as the riders approached. Clara's hand rested near the Colt at her hip, but she made no move to draw it. Whatever came next, she wouldn't give them an excuse to shoot first. Matthew Cray reined up 10 feet away, his cold blue eyes, so like his brother's, taking in the scene. His gaze lingered on Clara, then shifted to Elijah with calculating interest. "Clara," Matthew said, touching his hat brim in mock courtesy, "you've led us quite a chase." "I'm a free woman." "Matthew," Wade Harkins confessed, "the marshal in Sagebrush cleared my name." "Did he now?" Matthew's smile was humorless. Funny thing about that confession, Wade disappeared right after, before anyone could verify his story. Some say he was paid to take the blame, then helped to escape. "That's a lie," Clara said, though her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "Is it? No matter. I'm not here about Sam's death, though Lord knows I'd like to see you swing for it." Matthew's eyes glittered with hate. "I'm here on federal business. Seems you've been harboring a fugitive." He turned his attention to Elijah. "Dr. Elijah Hale, you're under arrest for treason, dereliction of duty, and aiding enemies of the United States. You'll come with us peacefully, or we'll take you in chains. Your choice." "No." Clara stepped forward. "He's done nothing wrong. He saved a woman's life." "An enemy combatant," Matthew corrected. "That Pawnee woman's brothers rode with the raiders who killed 15 settlers. By helping her, the good doctor here made himself party to their crimes." Elijah placed a gentle hand on Clara's arm. "It's all right." "It's not all right," she whirled on him. "You can't just give up." "I'm not giving up, but I won't have bloodshed on my account." He looked at Matthew. "I'll come peacefully, on one condition. You let Clara go. She's done nothing but accept help from a stranger." Matthew laughed. "Oh, I think she's done a bit more than that, judging by how cozy you two look, but that's not my concern. I've got federal warrants for you. Doctor, not her, though." His smile turned cruel. "Once we get you back to town, who knows what other charges might surface. People who consort with traitors often find themselves tangled in their crimes." The threat hung heavy in the air. Clara understood the game now. Matthew would use Elijah to get to her, and her to get to Elijah. One way or another, he intended to have his revenge for his brother's death. "Give us a moment," Elijah requested, "to gather my things." Matthew considered, then nodded. 5 minutes. My men have itchy trigger fingers, so don't try anything clever." Inside the tent, Elijah moved quickly despite his still healing wound. He pressed his journal into Clara's hands. "Take this. Everything's in there. My notes, my accounts, evidence about what really happened in Missouri. I'm not letting them take you. You don't have a choice. But listen, there's a lawyer in Denver, James Morrison. He's been working on my case, gathering testimonies. The journal will help him." He cupped her face in his hands. "This isn't the end. Clara, I promise you." "You can't promise that." Tears ran down her cheeks. "They'll manufacture evidence, twist the law. Maybe, but I have to believe justice still means something in this country." He kissed her, soft and desperate. "I love you. Whatever happens, remember that." A sharp whistle from outside. Their time was up. Elijah emerged from the tent with dignity intact, medical bag in hand. One of Matthew's men dismounted, producing shackles. "Are those really necessary?" Clara demanded. He said he'd come peacefully. Standard procedure for federal prisoners. Matthew watched with satisfaction as the irons were locked around Elijah's wrists. "Can't have him getting ideas on the trail." They helped Elijah mount, his hands bound in front of him. Clara noticed how pale he was, the way he swayed slightly in the saddle. The wound was barely healed. Hard riding could reopen it. "He needs medical attention," she said urgently. "He was shot 2 weeks ago. The wound still—" "Then he should have thought of that before harboring you." Matthew wheeled his horse around. "Move out!" As the group began to ride away, Clara couldn't stand it. "Wait, I'm coming with you." Matthew paused, looking back with interest. "Is that so?" "Clara." "No," Elijah called out, but she was already mounting Buttercup. "He needs medical care on the trail. I know how to tend his wound." She met Matthew's gaze steadily. "Unless you want to explain to a federal judge how your prisoner died in custody." Matthew considered. Having her along would make both prisoners easier to control. "Fine, but you'll ride where I can see you. And any trouble from either of you." He let the threat hang. They rode through the day, the pace brutal. Elijah said nothing, but Clara could see the strain in his face, the way he gripped the saddle horn with bound hands. By evening, fresh blood spotted his shirt. When they finally made camp, Clara immediately went to him. "Let me check the wound." "Prisoners don't get special treatment," one of the men said. But Matthew waved him off. "Let her. No good to us if he dies." Clara carefully unwrapped the bandages, biting back a gasp. The wound had partially reopened, the edges angry and seeping, without proper supplies. Infection was a real danger. "I need clean water and bandages," she said. "Make do with what you have," Matthew replied. But he did allow one of his men to bring water. Clara worked by firelight, aware of the men watching her every move. Elijah remained stoic, though she knew the pain must be excruciating. "This is barbaric," she muttered, tearing strips from her petticoat for bandages. "This is justice," Matthew countered. "My brother might have had his faults, but he was still my blood. Someone's going to pay for his death." That night, they slept on hard ground, Elijah's hands still shackled. Clara lay nearby, ostensibly under guard, but really keeping watch over him. When he developed a fever near dawn, she was immediately at his side. "He needs rest," she told Matthew. "And proper medicine. There's a town half a day's ride west." "We stick to the plan. Federal lockup in Prescott, then transport to Missouri for trial. He won't make it to Prescott like this." Matthew shrugged. "Then I guess you'd better pray harder." They rode on. Elijah's condition worsened, though he tried to hide it. By midday, he was slumped in the saddle, barely conscious. Clara rode close, steadying him when possible, her heart breaking with each labored breath he took. It was then that salvation came from an unexpected source. A voice called out from the rocks above, "Federal Marshal Matthew Cray." The riders pulled up, hands on weapons. A lone figure emerged, a woman in traveling clothes, holding papers that fluttered in the desert wind. "My name is Catherine Morrison," she announced, "attorney at law, Denver District. I have a federal writ of habeas corpus for Dr. Elijah Hale, signed by Judge William Thornton of the Colorado Supreme Court." Matthew's face darkened. "This is federal business, and this is a federal writ, superseding your arrest warrant pending judicial review." The woman descended with surprising agility for someone in skirts. "I also have sworn affidavits from 15 citizens of Jefferson City, Missouri, testifying to Dr. Hale's character and the circumstances of his alleged crimes." She was perhaps 40, with steel-gray hair and eyes that matched. Clara had never seen a female lawyer before, but this woman wore her authority like armor. "My husband has been investigating Dr. Hale's case for months," Catherine continued. "When we received word of his arrest, Judge Thornton agreed the matter required immediate intervention." "You can't," Matthew started. I can, and I have. You'll release Dr. Hale immediately, or face federal charges yourself for violating a court order. The standoff lasted long moments. Matthew's men looked uncertain. Federal marshals they might be, but defying a judge's direct order was serious business. Finally, Matthew spat in the dust. Unshackle him. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. As the irons fell away, Elijah collapsed. Clara caught him, easing him to the ground. We need a doctor, she said urgently. There's a wagon waiting below, Catherine said. With medical supplies and a nurse, we anticipated his condition might be poor. As they helped Elijah to the wagon, Catherine drew Clara aside. You must be Clara Mitchell. Elijah wrote of you. He did. Asked us to look into your case as well. My husband's already filed papers. The witness who supposedly saw you at the scene of your husband's death has recanted. Seems he was paid to lie. Catherine smiled. You're both free, Miss Mitchell. Truly free. Clara felt her knees go weak with relief. How can we ever thank you? By living good lives, by making all this struggle mean something. Catherine glanced at where Elijah was being tended in the wagon. He's a good man. They're rare enough in this world. Matthew and his men left, but not before he leaned down to Clara. This isn't finished. Legal tricks won't protect you forever. No, Clara agreed, meeting his gaze without fear. But the truth will. Your brother was a monster. Matthew, deep down, you know it. Maybe someday you'll accept it. He rode away without another word, dust and defeated in his wake. The journey to the nearby town was careful, with Clara holding Elijah's head in her lap. He drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering apologies, declarations of love, medical instructions all jumbled together. Stop trying to diagnose yourself, Clara said through tears. Let someone else be the doctor for once. At the small clinic, the local doctor, a young man fresh from medical school, worked to repair the damage from the reopened wound. Clara paced outside. Catherine Morrison, a steady presence beside her. He'll recover, Catherine said firmly. That man survived too much to be felt now. I almost lost him. Again. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. How many times can we dodge death before it catches up? That's the wrong question. The right one is, how will you use the time you're given? When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was cautiously optimistic. He'll mend, needs rest, proper food, no excitement for at least a month. But he'll mend. Clara nearly collapsed with relief. Catherine steadied her, guided her to a chair. There now, the worst is past. But Clara knew better. The worst was the fear that never quite left. The knowledge of how easily happiness could be snatched away. She'd learned that lesson too well. When they finally let her see him, Elijah was awake, weak but lucid. His face lit up at the sight of her. You stayed, he said softly. Where else would I be? She took his hand, careful of the new bandages. We're free, Elijah, both of us. Catherine Morrison brought papers, testimonies. It's over. He studied her face. You don't believe it. I want to, but men like Matthew don't give up easily. And there'll be others. There always are. Then we'll face them together. He squeezed her hand weakly. That's what partners do. Clara smiled through her tears. Is that a proposal, Dr. Hale? Because your timing is terrible. Maybe. Would you say yes? Ask me again when you're not half delirious from blood loss. But she leaned down and kissed him, gentle and sure. And in that kiss was her answer. Whatever came next, whether Matthew returned, whether new threats emerged, whether the world accepted them or not, they would face it together. Outside, the sun set over the small town, painting the sky in shades of hope and warning. Clara sat by Elijah's bedside, keeping watch, and began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had finally found their way home to each other. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to travel, and that, Clara thought, was its own kind of freedom. The church bells of Sagebrush rang out in the morning air, their bronze voices carrying across the desert town like harbingers of judgment. Clara stood in the dusty street, Catherine Morrison at her side, watching as people emerged from shops and homes to witness her return. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion, and a few, precious few, offered tentative smiles of support. "Are you ready for this?" Catherine asked, adjusting her leather portfolio. "No," Clara admitted. "But it needs to be done." They had left Elijah recovering in the clinic, despite his protests. This was Clara's battle to fight, her past to confront. The evidence Catherine had gathered was damning. Signed testimonies, financial records, even a letter in Samuel's own hand detailing his crimes. But evidence was only powerful if people were willing to hear it. The courthouse stood like a fortress of limestone and certainty, its steps worn smooth by years of people seeking justice. At the top waited Marshall Garrett, older now, his weathered face unreadable. Beside him stood Matthew Cray, no longer wearing a federal badge but armed with influence and rage. "Clara Mitchell," the marshal said formally. "Or is it Mrs. Cray?" "Mitchell," Clara said firmly. "I've come to clear my name. Your name was already cleared," Matthew interjected, "by a convenient confession from a dead man." Catherine stepped forward. "Wade Harkins isn't dead. Mr. Cray. He's very much alive and currently in custody in Denver. He's provided a full confession, including details of how you helped him fake his execution." The crowd that had gathered murmured at this revelation. Matthew's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Lies," he spat. "This woman killed my brother in cold blood." "Your brother," Clara said, her voice carrying clearly, "was a murderer, a thief, and worse. I have proof." She nodded to Catherine, who produced a leather-bound ledger, Samuel's private accounts, discovered hidden in the false bottom of a trunk Clara had remembered from their bedroom. "Your brother stole over $30,000 from the town treasury." Clara continued. "He killed 4 men who discovered his theft, including Tom Haskins, and yes, Matthew. He kept records, names, dates, amounts. His own pride was his downfall." Marshall Garrett took the ledger, scanning its contents with growing alarm. The crowd pressed closer, voices rising in shock and anger. "This proves nothing," Matthew said desperately. "She could have written this herself." "Then how do you explain this?" Catherine produced another document, a signed statement from the Bank of Missouri, confirming irregular deposits matching the amounts in that ledger, or these sworn affidavits from the families of the men your brother killed. The evidence mounted, piece by damning piece. Clara watched Matthew's world crumble as surely as hers once had, but where she had expected to feel satisfaction, she found only sadness. Samuel had destroyed so many lives, including his brother's. "There's more," Clara said quietly. When the crowd stilled, she continued, "I know who really killed Samuel." Every eye fixed on her. Even Matthew stopped protesting. "It was Edgar Moss," she said. "Samuel's own deputy." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Edgar had disappeared the night of Samuel's death, supposedly in pursuit of Clara. Edgar discovered Samuel was planning to frame him for the treasury theft. Clara explained, "I overheard them arguing that night. Samuel laughed, said a deputy was as good a scapegoat as a wife. Edgar shot him and ran. I found the body, knew I'd be blamed, and fled too." "Convenient that neither Edgar nor Wade can confirm this story," Matthew said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually," Catherine said, producing one final document. "Edgar Moss was arrested last month in California. He's agreed to return and testify in exchange for consideration in his sentencing." The silence that followed was profound. Marshall Garrett looked between the evidence and Clara's face, then made his decision. "Miss Mitchell, on behalf of this office and this town, I apologize. You were wronged by the very people meant to protect you." He turned to Matthew. "Mr. Cray, I'll need you to come with me. There are questions about your involvement in Wade Harkins's escape." "This isn't over," Matthew snarled at Clara as the marshal led him away. "My brother—" "Your brother is dead," Clara said sadly. "Let him go, Matthew, for your own sake. Let him go." As the crowd dispersed, People approached Clara with varying degrees of shame and apology. Some had believed in her innocence all along, but had been too afraid to speak. Others admitted they'd been quick to judge, swayed by Samuel's power and position. "What will you do now?" asked Mrs. Elmira Hobbs, who ran the general store. She'd been one of the few to slip Clara supplies during her marriage, small kindnesses that had meant everything. "I'm going to Colorado," Clara said, "to start fresh. With that doctor fellow?" Elmira smiled knowingly. "Good. You deserve some happiness after all this." Clara spent the next days settling Samuel's affairs. The stolen money was returned to the town treasury. The ranch, which she could have claimed as Samuel's widow, she sold to a young couple just starting out, practically giving it away. She wanted nothing that carried his memory. At Samuel's grave, she stood for a long moment, not in mourning but in contemplation. Once, she had loved the man she thought he was. That illusion had died long before he did. "I forgive you," she said to the headstone. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I won't carry you with me anymore." On her last day in Sagebrush, Clara visited the small cemetery where Tom Haskins was buried. She laid wildflowers on his grave and that of the other men Samuel had killed. Their families had thanked her for bringing the truth to light, but she felt the weight of survival when they hadn't. "Justice doesn't bring them back," one widow had said, "but at least now we know why." When Clara returned to the clinic 2 weeks later, she found Elijah much improved. He was sitting up, reading medical journals, looking more like himself despite the lingering pallor. "How did it go?" he asked immediately. She told him everything, the confrontation, the evidence, Matthew's arrest. With each word, she felt lighter, as if shedding layers of old pain. "You're remarkable," Elijah said when she finished. "Do you know that?" "I'm tired," she corrected. "Tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of the past chasing me." She took his hand. "I want to go to Colorado. I want that life we talked about." "Then that's what we'll do." He pulled her down for a kiss. "As soon as the doctor clears me to travel." "You are a doctor," she reminded him, smiling. "The worst physician is the one who treats himself," he quoted. "But perhaps in another week." It was 3 weeks before they finally set out for Colorado, accompanied part of the way by Catherine Morrison, who had become a dear friend. The journey was slow, accommodating Elijah's recovery, but Clara didn't mind. Each mile put more distance between them and the shadows of the past. "I've been thinking," Elijah said one evening as they camped under a canopy of stars, "about names." "Oh, I could practice under a different name in Colorado. Start completely fresh, no connection to the past." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks it would be easier, but another part," he sighed, "I earned my name. The good and the bad. Maybe running from it gives it more power than facing it." "Then we face it," Clara said simply. "Dr. Elijah Hale and—" She paused. "I suppose I need to decide too. Mitchell or Cray or—" "Hale," Elijah suggested softly. "If you'll have me." Clara's heart skipped. "Is that your way of proposing again? Because you're no longer delirious from blood loss." He shifted to face her fully, taking both her hands. "Clara Mitchell, you saved my life in every way a life can be saved. You've seen me at my worst and somehow still look at me like I'm worth something. I have nothing to offer but a hard life in a frontier town, my questionable reputation, and more scars than any man should carry. But I love you more than I thought possible, and if you'll have me—" "Yes," Clara interrupted. "Yes to all of it. The hard life, the scars, the love, especially the love." They were married a week later in a small chapel in Pueblo, with Catherine Morrison and her husband as witnesses. Clara wore a simple blue dress, Elijah his one good suit. There were no flowers, no fancy reception, just two people promising to face whatever came next together. "You could have had better," Elijah murmured as they stood before the altar. "There is no better," Clara replied, and meant it. After the ceremony, James Morrison pulled Elijah aside. "That town in Colorado, Silver Creek, they're expecting you. The mayor's already had 3 inquiries about when their new doctor will arrive. Seems your reputation preceded you, in a good way. Our reputation, Elijah corrected. Glancing at Clara, I have a feeling Mrs. Hale will be just as vital to the practice as I am. The truth of that would prove out in time. Clara's experience treating Elijah had given her confidence and skill. In Silver Creek, she would become his assistant, then his partner, earning the town's respect through competence and compassion. But that was still to come. For now, they stood outside the chapel, hands linked, facing the mountains that rose like promises in the distance. No regrets? Clara asked. Only one, Elijah said. That it took so long to find you. She laughed, the sound bright and free. Better late than never. Dr. Hale. Indeed. Mrs. Hale, indeed. A photographer Catherine had hired captured them in that moment. Clara laughing, Elijah gazing at her with naked adoration, the mountains behind them like silent witnesses to their joy. It would be the only photograph of their wedding, but it would capture everything that mattered. As they climbed into the wagon that would carry them to their new life, Clara looked back one last time at the road they'd traveled. So much pain, so much loss, so much fear, but it had led them here, to this moment, to each other. Ready? Elijah asked, taking up the reins. Clara settled beside him, her hand finding his. I've been ready my whole life. The wagon rolled forward, wheels creaking a rhythm like a heartbeat. Behind them, the past grew distant. Ahead, the mountains beckoned with promise. They had survived the worst the world could offer. Now it was time to live. The journey to Mexico stretched before them like a promise written in dust and distance. Clara rode beside Elijah, their horses picking their way carefully along the rocky trail that wound south through New Mexico territory. The landscape had changed from the harsh beauty of Arizona's canyons to rolling hills dotted with mesquite and ocotillo, their blooms like flames against the pale earth. It had been 3 days since they'd left the last American settlement behind. 3 days of watching Elijah grow stronger with each mile, the color returning to his face, the pain lines around his eyes softening. 3 days of freedom so complete it almost frightened her. There! Elijah pointed to a cluster of cottonwoods in the distance. Water. We'll rest the horses. As they approached the grove, Clara noticed how differently they moved together now. No longer the desperate flight of fugitives, but the measured pace of travelers with purpose. The horses sensed it too, their ears forward with interest rather than flicked back in constant vigilance. The spring was small but clear, bubbling up from rocks worn smooth by centuries of flow. As the horses drank, Clara and Elijah sat in the blessed shade, sharing water and dried meat, comfortable in their silence. I've been thinking, Clara said eventually, about what we'll do when we get there, to Sonora. Besides not getting shot at? Elijah's attempt at levity couldn't quite mask the uncertainty beneath. Besides that, she turned to face him fully. You could practice medicine again, really practice, not just patch up outlaws and fugitives. My Spanish is rusty at best. It'll improve, and healing doesn't always need words. She touched his hand. You're too good a doctor to waste your skills hiding forever. Elijah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the spring. What about you? What do you want, Clara? The question caught her off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked what she wanted? Not what was expected, not what was proper, but what she truly desired. I want to learn, she said slowly. Everything you can teach me about medicine. I want to help people the way you helped me. She met his eyes. Is that foolish? No more foolish than a disgraced doctor thinking he could find redemption in the desert. His smile was soft, wondering. You've already shown you have the instincts for it, the steady hands, the quick mind, the compassion. Then we'll do it together? Build something new? Together, he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of possibility. They traveled on as the sun began its descent, the sky painting itself in shades of amber and rose. The trail wound through a narrow pass, and as they emerged on the other side, the vista that greeted them stole Clara's breath. The valley spread below like a green jewel, irrigated fields creating a patchwork of cultivation against the desert backdrop. A river wound through it all, silver in the dying light, and along its banks, a town nestled, adobe buildings glowing warm in the sunset, church bells beginning their evening song. Los Sauces, Elijah said, consulting the map Jonas had drawn for them. The Willows, last stop before the border. They descended slowly, aware that this was a threshold. Once they crossed into Mexico, there would be no turning back, not just geographically, but in every way that mattered. The United States, with all its painful memories and failed promises, would be behind them forever. The inn was modest but clean, run by a Mexican woman named Rosa, who took one look at their travel-worn faces and immediately began fussing over them like a mother hen. Her English was limited, but her hospitality needed no translation. "Recién casados?" she asked, noting how they unconsciously leaned toward each other. "Sí," Clara replied, using one of the few Spanish words she knew. "Newlyweds." Rosa's face lit up. She chattered rapidly in Spanish, gesturing expressively, and though they couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. Congratulations, blessings, joy for their happiness. That night, in their small room overlooking the plaza, Clara stood at the window watching the town settle into evening. Families gathered in doorways. Children played in the dusty streets. And somewhere a guitar picked out a melody both foreign and welcoming. "Scared?" Elijah asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Terrified," she admitted. "But it's a different kind of fear, not the desperate, running kind, more like standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. We don't have to go. We could stay here, in Los Sauces, close enough to the border to run if needed, but still in familiar territory." Clara turned in his arms. "Is that what you want? I want you safe, happy. Everything else is negotiable. Then we go on," she said firmly. "Safety is an illusion. Elijah, we've both learned that, but happiness, that's something we can build, no matter where we are." The next morning brought unexpected complications. As they prepared to leave, Rosa pulled them aside, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by concern. "Soldados," she whispered, glancing toward the plaza. "Americanos, asking questions." Clara's blood ran cold. Through the inn's window, she could see them, 4 cavalry soldiers, their blue uniforms dusty from hard riding. They were showing papers to locals, obviously searching for someone. "The back way," Rosa urged, already ushering them toward the rear entrance. "Rapido!" They slipped out through the kitchen garden, leading their horses quietly through narrow alleys. But as they reached the edge of town, a voice called out, "Doctor, hail, Mrs. Hail, please, wait!" They turned to find not a soldier, but a young woman running toward them, a baby in her arms. She was American, her face desperate with fear. "Please," she gasped, reaching them. "You're the doctor from the canyon, the one who helps people." Elijah glanced at Clara, then nodded slowly. "What's wrong?" "My baby, she's burning with fever. The local curandero tried, but nothing helps." "Please, I know you're leaving, but—" She didn't need to finish. Elijah was already reaching for his medical bag, his calling overriding caution. "Show me." They followed her to a small adobe house where her husband waited, pacing anxiously. The baby was indeed feverish, her breathing labored. Elijah worked with focused intensity, Clara assisting as she'd learned to do. "Pneumonia," he diagnosed. "But caught early? I can help." For the next hour, they worked together, preparing poultices, brewing medicinal tea, showing the parents how to continue treatment. All the while, Clara kept watch, expecting soldiers to appear at any moment. They never came, as the baby's breathing eased and her fever began to break. The father gripped Elijah's hand with tears in his eyes. "I don't have much money." "Keep it," Elijah said. "Use it for your family." "But how can we thank you?" "By paying it forward," Clara said softly. "Help someone else when you can." As they finally left Los Sauces, taking a circuitous route to avoid the soldiers, Clara felt something shift inside her. They weren't just running anymore. Even in flight, they were building something. A reputation, a purpose, a life defined not by what they fled but by what they chose to do. The border, when they reached it, was anticlimactic. No grand demarcation, just a river running brown and sluggish between two lands. They crossed at a shallow ford, the water barely reaching the horses' bellies. On the other side, Elijah reined in his horse and looked back. Any regrets? Clara thought of all they'd left behind, the graves of loved ones, the places that had shaped them, the country of their birth. Then she thought of what lay ahead, unknown but full of potential, frightening but free. None, she said, and meant it. They rode on into Mexico, into Sonora's vast spaces, where the mountains rose blue in the distance and the air tasted of sage and possibility. The first village they reached welcomed them with curious friendliness. Elijah's medical skills transcended language barriers, and Clara discovered she had a gift for communicating through gestures and smiles. Within a month, they had established a small clinic in the town of Agua Bendita, Blessed Water, named for the natural springs that had drawn settlers for generations. Their adobe house was simple but theirs, with a consulting room in front and living quarters behind. A small garden where Clara grew both food and medicinal herbs. The practice grew slowly, but surely. Word spread of the American doctor who charged fair prices and treated everyone equally, Mexican and Indian, rich and poor. Clara learned Spanish with determined intensity, soon able to translate for Elijah and eventually to treat simpler cases herself. One evening, 6 months after their arrival, Clara found Elijah sitting in their garden, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "What are you thinking?" she asked, settling beside him on the worn wooden bench they'd built together. "That I spent so many years running from my past, I forgot to imagine a future." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "Now I can't stop imagining it, growing old with you here, teaching you everything I know, maybe training other healers, building something that lasts." "Children?" Clara asked softly, voicing the hope she'd barely dared acknowledge. "If we're blessed, and if not, we'll heal other people's children. Either way, we'll leave the world better than we found it." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Elijah Hale." "And I love you, Clara Hale, more than I have words for in any language." As darkness fell and the first stars emerged, they sat in peaceful silence. No longer outlaws or fugitives, but simply two people who had found their way through darkness into light. The desert around them was vast and sometimes unforgiving, but it was also beautiful in its stark honesty, its endless skies, its promise of tomorrow. Inside their small house, a lamp burned warm against the night. Neighbors would come with their ailments and fears, and Clara and Elijah would meet them with healing hands and open hearts. It wasn't the life either had imagined in their youth, but it was theirs, carved out of hope and determination, love and second chances. In the morning there would be patience to see, herbs to gather, life to be lived fully and without fear. But for now, they sat together in their garden, watching the stars emerge one by one, each a small light against the darkness, each a promise that even in the vast night sky, no light shines alone. Their story had begun with blood and flight, with a wounded woman falling from a horse and a broken man choosing to care. It continued now with healing and hope, with two souls who had saved each other building something beautiful from the ashes of their former lives. The desert sang its night song around them, coyotes calling, wind through mesquite, the distant music from the cantina, and Clara and Elijah Hale added their own quiet harmony, the sound of two hearts beating as one, finally, blessedly, home. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please leave a comment below to let us know where in the world our stories are reaching. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Elijah's journey. Your comments and support mean everything to us.